Hello, Jessie. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. We're so excited to have you. For those that don't know your story, could you quickly tell us who you are, what you do, and how you made your first million?
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Jessie Healy. I'm a marketing specialist. I've worked in D2C e-commerce marketing for a number of years, but I started an agency. So that's kind of how I guess the two ways I made my first million were partly the property I bought before I started my business that did pretty well and went up in value quite a bit, combined with starting an agency and scaling that during the pandemic.
That is incredible for two reasons. And I'm so excited to talk about how you used multiple ways and it wasn't just one thing that brought you your money. And thank you for being so candid. Let's start when you were younger. Let's go to, Jessie as a toddler, Jessie as a young kid. What was it like growing up at home? Was money something that was discussed? Were there good money habits that you picked up from your parents, or maybe money habits that you had to unlearn over time?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. So I think my parents are pretty open about money, and I think they created pretty good habits. They were pretty frugal. So I saw them, buy an old house in Newtown and Wellington and do it up all by hand. We prioritized experiences over like material goods. So we went on lots of like camping holidays. They saved up money and we went overseas and did overseas travel in the 80s, which, wasn't super common, especially in the neighborhood I lived in. But they weren't entrepreneurs, so they weren't, I guess, risk takers with their money. So probably a little on the prudent side, I guess you would say. And so what that meant is it made me like a really good saver. It made me really kind of cognizant of like, living within my means. And again, it kind of gave me that value system around, like it's not about keeping up with the Joneses or having material possessions just for the status of them, but more thinking about like, how can you use your money to like have the life that you want and enjoy and have great experiences. But I think on the other hand, being a business owner, sometimes that mindset's held me back a little bit in terms of being able to like make more bold decisions around taking some risks, I guess, in my business. And I also didn't become an entrepreneur until I was kind of forced to, and we can get into that in a little bit. I took the safe route of kind of working in the corporate world, which I didn't actually thrive in. I did okay, but I didn't thrive in. And I was kind of scared. I thought going into business was risk-taking. I thought investing in the stock market was risk-taking. And so I had a little bit of kind of holding me back in that sense. But then who's to say, right? Like that combination of like, all those things came together and meant, I'm in a pretty good position today. So maybe being a little bit prudent in how I ran my business has led to some success too. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think we grow up and think that maybe being a risk taker has only one outcome, or being, a little bit more on the cautious side. I would say you are a risk taker. I think you just take a calculated risk. Risk taking doesn't mean like put everything you own into one stock and like fingers crossed and hope it does well.
Yeah.
So with your parents, you said that they weren't really big risk takers. They wanted to be more on the safe and steady side. How would that kind of show up day to day? Or, it sounds like they still enjoyed a little bit, like, going on holiday, but not trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah. So I think it's like, it's something that I just notice now comes up in conversation. Like I'll talk to my dad about some of the decisions I may be making in my business or things I'm going to try out in my work life, and he'll sort of have this reaction that's very kind of like, oh, are you sure about that? Is that safe? Batten down the hatches. And like I noticed with all the stuff that's going on with Trump, like he said he had a sleepless night worrying about me and like some of the work I'm doing. And I was like, I'm not worried. It's fine. So yeah, it's sort of like, I don't know if it comes from like, so my dad's dad experienced the Great Depression, and his father lost a whole lot of houses he owned in Wellington. And so then my dad's dad wasn't a very, didn't have much money. And so my dad grew up not poor, but like, kind of struggling lower middle class, I guess. And I think that kind of like influenced how he thinks about money too. So he's very like careful with it.
That's such a good point. Do you think he experienced, seeing his grandfather have a lot of money and then lose it all and think it's not a permanent thing?
Yes, definitely. I think he heard about that story. It was like a big story in their family. And so it was always like, don't over leverage yourself. because I guess that's what happened. I guess those properties had mortgages and they couldn't pay them when all the people didn't have work and couldn't pay their rent. And so, yeah, that was kind of a story. Like, even I know that story, and it was my dad's grandfather. So I'm, someone I never met many generations back.
So then take me through what like schooling was like. Were you like a very diligent student? Were you more of a creative?
Yeah, so I went to a school, Newtown School in Wellington in the 80s, which had a real, generally was a pretty low income school. So there were kids there who didn't have lunch. There were kids there who didn't have shoes. I was, although from not a wealthy family at all, like felt like I was kind of one of the wealthier ones. So I think that definitely gave me a kind of like an appreciation for my privilege from early on. I think if I'd gone to a school where everyone was sort of a bit like me, I might have just not really noticed how much I had and, not maybe been as grateful for what I have. But I think also like going to a school like that was really multicultural, like gave me incredible like perspectives and made me someone who is quite open-minded and, I can connect with lots of different types of people because of that. So I'm really glad I had that upbringing. What kind of student I was? Yeah, I was a pretty diligent student. I was a bit of a like nerdy swot, but I also like to hang out with the kind of like, so I had a best friend and we used to study really hard and party really hard is probably the best way to describe it. So we would kind of sneak out and meet boys and go to parties and, we would drink and that kind of thing. But we also made sure we like did our homework, studied hard and got top marks. So she's still, one of my best friends today. So she was a pretty, I think, by and large, a good influence on me.
That is quite a funny story and quite incredible. I love an all-rounder. Yeah. You figured out that you were good at studying. How did you then decide, like, were you like, okay, I'm going to grow up and this is my career, this is my path? Like, how did you figure out the next steps?
Well, that was the thing. So I was this kind of like such an all-rounder. Like, I was kind of outgoing. I was also artistic. I was good at maths. I kind of was like into literature reading, but I wasn't like stand out in one. I was kind of like, across the board decent at everything. And so people said like, go and study what you like. And I'm lucky to come from a family where like, everyone went to uni, like my dad, both my parents, my mum's parents, like there's actually a whole line of women in my family going back to, I think it's my great-grandmother went to university. My grandmother
Really?
And my mum and me. I mean, talk about like what an incredible privilege to come from a line of women like that. So, yeah, that was just a given that I would go to university and that I could kind of just study what I want. Like there wasn't like, oh, you need to study accounting and become an accountant or anything like that in my family. But that meant it was all pretty open-ended and I swapped around different courses and degrees and I did a bit of this and a bit of that. And I came out with a degree in e-commerce, majoring in management and commercial law, and a political science degree with a kind of a minor in Spanish. So like, go figure, like such a random mix. And then I got a job straight out of uni through like a friend, someone my mum had met at work was like, oh, this company needs someone. So I got this really random job, but it was kind of loosely in marketing, kind of sales actually. In reality, they called it marketing, but it was sort of sales. And it just got some experience working in a job. And I'd been told, the one piece of advice I've been told is before you do your OE and go overseas, OE for those who aren't from New Zealand, overseas experience, it's a big thing to go overseas, when you're in your 20s in New Zealand. And I wanted to do that as soon as possible. I was desperate, but I had been told get some work experience before you go so that when you get to the UK, you've got something on your CV and you're not just stuck working in like some admin job. So I did about a year and a half in this random marketing job that was pretty random. And I remember it paid 32K a year, New Zealand dollars. So not much money at all. And that was early 2000s. But headed over to the UK. And by the time I got to the UK, I had been traveling for 9 months. So I did South America and did an internship in South America, which was like close to unpaid. They gave me a little bit of money to survive. But by the time I got to the UK, I had £500 left. So, I said I wasn't a risk taker, but I guess to an extent I am, because to turn up in a new country with a work visa and only £500 and expect that, I'm going to try and just find a job and make it work, which I managed to do. So that's a little potted history of my early career.
And so from the UK, how did you then, did you stay there for a little while and keep developing your career? How did you kind of go up the corporate ladder, especially as someone that sounds like you kind of enjoy using both sides of your brain? You know how some people are like right brain, some people are left brain. I can never remember which one is like creative and which one's like analytical, but it sounds like you liked both. How did you then kind of navigate the corporate world where, it's not very clear, like this is your one path, you're just good at maths, go there?
Yeah, I think you're totally bang on about the two sides of the brain. So I definitely am creative, but I'm not like so creative that I think I would be a designer. Definitely good with numbers, but I couldn't be an analyst all day long. And actually that combination is great for marketing because it's analytical and creative. And it's great for digital marketing because digital marketing has a lot of kind of like numbers-based stuff. So I pretty quickly fell into digital marketing in the UK, and it was so it's 2005 when I landed there. So there was sort of like all this stuff happening online and people were trying to navigate it, and I was 25, and so they expected that I would probably be quite good at it. And so they would throw stuff at me, and I had the first job was at a government department, and I just remember this, like, it was so like some kind of like British TV show about a government department. Like there was not even tea or coffee. There wasn't even like dishwashing liquid. You had to bring your own. There was like...
Got to save the taxpayers their money.
Exactly, yeah. We weren't allowed to have any like staff parties or anything. But it was kind of a cool job. We were building this website for the kind of, it was like the overseas investment part of the government. So kind of like an NZTE type thing if you're a New Zealander. I don't know what the equivalent is in the US. And we're building this website and we were doing all this like cool, quite cutting edge stuff. And they gave me heaps of like freedom to kind of learn stuff and figure it out. And that job was £19,000 a year. So under 40,000 New Zealand dollars, probably, about 35,000 US dollars, not very well paid at all. I could barely get by, but it was a job in London and I was just super excited about that. So I did that job for about a year. And then from there, my CV now had like digital marketing on it. And I was able to get jobs super easily and just kind of jump from job to job, like stepping up the ladder. One thing I noticed about myself though, is that I never stuck around long enough to get a promotion. So I never once in my whole career before I promoted myself by becoming an entrepreneur was ever promoted. And I always wonder, like, was there something wrong with me? Did I just not have enough patience to stick in one job? I'm self-diagnosed ADHD. Dad's going to get mad at me for saying that because, again, with his risk thing, he thinks that it's really dangerous to, like, talk about these things. But I'm very open about it. And I think there was some stuff there with that. Like, I probably needed people in my business. I hired people around me to like help with the things that I'm not as good at, detail stuff. I'm great at the big ideas. I can get a whole lot of stuff done, but sometimes I like drop balls on detail. You can't give that to someone else when you're in a job in a kind of, mid-tier marketing role. So I worked my way up by jumping from job to job and like doing sort of a year and a half stints in each job, and got lots and lots of amazing skills in digital marketing, and always wanted to start my own business, but just didn't think it was for me. Didn't want to give up the salary, the regular paycheck until... Well, that's the next bit of the story. Shall I tell it? Until I was 7 months pregnant and the company I worked for went bust. And it was a crazy, like spectacular going bust story. So the business was a unicorn. People had been investing in it like crazy. We had a Christmas party just before all this happened where they had like fireworks with the business name like in the sky. The founder was flying private jets everywhere, but it turned out he was just spending all the money, and he spent it all. And then there wasn't a job for any of us. And we got called into a room told no final paycheck, no severance, no redundancy pay, nothing. We can't even like pay your paycheck that's owed. And I obviously was 7 months pregnant, and they were like, well, no maternity pay either. Yeah, so that was pretty shocking. But luckily so a year before that, I'd been made redundant from another job. So I got made twice redundant in my career within a year. So that was kind of like a turning point for me too. Like, is a safe job actually a safe job after all? In the corporate world today, like, are you ever safe? Probably not. So I had £10,000 from that, which I just put in a term deposit. I can't remember what the reason was why I wanted to be careful with that, but I decided that I did need to be careful with that money. So I had that £10,000, and so I knew I had a little bit of buffer, and I was able to, with the other employees, we were able to fight. There's a government fund that pays out maternity pay, like a kind of a small amount of maternity pay, and also pays out a small amount of like government redundancy when the company goes bust. But we had to do a whole process to get that money, and I kind of like was the leader of that with my big pregnant belly, while the other team members all went and got jobs. Like, it was pretty easy to get a new job in London. I couldn't do that though because I was pregnant. So that's when I started freelancing in digital advertising. And once I started freelancing, I realized, hey, there's a huge amount of like opportunity here. And so when my son was a little baby, started the agency.
What an incredible like founding story. I want to like just spend a bit more time on that mindset that I think you had, and I think a lot of us have had, around having a job is safety, it's security, and business or entrepreneurship is like the Wild West. And I wonder if it comes from like our parents' generation, where you would just stay in one job for, 40, 30 years, and then they would take, imagine, and then they would take care of you. But how did you move away from that idea that it's just not as low risk as we think it is? I guess getting made redundant twice in a year probably helped.
Yeah, I honestly think like I feel so grateful. Like at the time it felt pretty crazy. Actually, interestingly, the first redundancy hurt me a lot because it felt, at that time I was the only one being made redundant. It felt very personal and it took a lot to kind of recover from. The second time I was kind of like, this is just like, I'm used to this now. But also it was a group of people all together, and it was so clearly not our fault. But yeah, so I think that those two catalysts really like gave me the push I needed to like experience entrepreneurship and actually realize like it's not, if you're a smart person and you've got like a service that people need, starting a service-based business is not, in my opinion, super hard, or it wasn't in my experience at all. I think you've got to, it's a different thing. I work with e-commerce brands now, like that's what my agency helps, and what who I help now in my consulting business. With that kind of business, you definitely do have to have some money to put forward to buy product and to kind of invest in ads. But a service-based business, if you've got contacts that you've built up over time, like it's not crazy difficult. And I think, again, having that mindset of like, I'm kind of investing in the long term of this and having a bit more of a marathon mindset rather than, get rich quick overnight. I think that's the key thing. And also like that mindset of experimentation. So like, you try something, you get back data, you decide whether that was the right thing to continue to do, or do we need to do something different? So having like a test, learn, refine, iterate mindset, I think for business, you can't go wrong.
Oh, I really like that. For those that are listening and going, I feel kind of stuck in my 9-to-5 job, and I was actually talking to a friend about this last night, and I'd like to take my job and turn it into maybe more of a service-based business where I'm consulting for a company rather than working in the company. Nowadays, what would you say would be like the right steps to take?
So the first most important thing is your personal brand. So while you're in that job, where you're being paid, take that opportunity to grow a personal brand. And that might look like, depending on your industry, that might look like LinkedIn or Twitter, starting to create content and building up a profile there. I was really lucky. I've been on LinkedIn for 18 years, which is really dating myself, but I must have just joined it when I was in the corporate world. Like everyone was joining it, I just joined it. And over time, I didn't like keep it up to date, but I definitely was always adding people from my network who I was meeting through work, and all these different jobs I was jumping between. I was, meeting whole new networks of people. So when I did launch my freelance business and then my agency, it was through LinkedIn connections and people like old colleagues seeing what I was up to that allowed me to just organically get a lot of business. And today I still get a ton of my business through LinkedIn.
And when you talk about like networking and having all these people in your, from your past, how did you do that? Was it just like constantly keeping in touch with people, or just being like, hey, let's just keep in touch on LinkedIn, and then they would just see your posts? Is that more?
Yeah, so it's hard for me to remember. Like I think there was a certain point, and I don't know when it happened, when LinkedIn started allowing people to kind of post updates about what they were doing, and people started going on LinkedIn as a social platform and like reading updates. It's certainly since then evolved massively into a content platform where people go specifically to learn and, get information from people who are sharing content about their industry. So if I recall correctly, I think that's exactly it. I think I just started updating people, hey, I've started this agency, or hey, I'm working on this now. And they were spotting those updates, because back then not many people were updating their LinkedIn with that kind of stuff. It was just like, I have started a new position. So yeah, and I can kind of remember just like colleagues going, oh, I saw your former colleagues saying, I saw you're doing this now. Hey, we should chat about, I'm working at this business. They need help like that. So that was one of the main ways I got business in the early days. And then also joined this network, which I don't think exists anymore, but it was a network for women in technology. And it was this kind of like chat forum thing. And I just remember posting on there. There was lots of founders and like early stage tech startups, and a lot of them in the kind of London scene. And I mean, London was a great place to be helping people with digital marketing, because there's just businesses being launched and grown all the time. So yeah, online networking essentially was what got me off the ground in terms of finding clients initially.
That is incredible. So I'd love to hear how you started managing your finances you've moved from your job. Sounds like your jobs didn't, they weren't quite the ones that provided the high salary. You probably weren't saving or you couldn't save or invest too much from that. How did you start paying yourself in your agency? And then how did you start building this sort of investment portfolio of your home that grew, and, other assets that you accumulated over time?
I never earned like a crazy salary in my marketing career, but it was like a good, decent salary. So by my final job before I was made redundant, was £62,000 a year, so about 120,000 New Zealand dollars. So, I was like being paid perfectly well. And so I was saving. So even when I had that 19K a year job, I was saving. Like yeah. So that's one thing about me. I just don't think I would ever feel safe unless I'm putting some money aside. And we could talk for hours about that. Probably need to talk to a therapist about like safety and all of that stuff. But that's the case. So I was prioritizing travel, partying, buying cool new clothes with that money that I had. I had a really cheap flat, and then I was putting aside, I don't know, it was probably like £30 a week or something like that. It was not much, but I slowly over time built up enough to buy our first house. And I did that before I launched the business. And I think that was one of the reasons why I was able to launch the business, because we bought our house in London for £270,000. This was with my partner, but he didn't have any savings to bring. He's a tiny bit younger than me, and he was just kind of starting out his career. So we bought this absolutely decrepit house that was like a former brothel next to a bar for next to nothing, but it was in kind of central London. And we did that up ourselves painstakingly. So I related to your post the other day about you like renovating your house yourself. My partner actually took like a year off work, and I like paid the bills, and he renovated the house. And we also had flatmates in there as well. And we had flatmates in even when it wasn't fully renovated. We got some financial security from that because we just didn't have a big mortgage. Interest rates were really low. And so I was able to then, continue to save. So that is what we did initially. And then sometime around, I think it was either just before or just after the redundancy, we'd already made a decision. We'd already like committed to buying a flat, as well as the flat in British English means apartment. It doesn't mean a shared house. Yeah. So we'd bought this cheap little apartment, and we were going to rent it out as an Airbnb. And so we went ahead with that. So when I started freelancing and launched the agency, I also had this kind of side hustle of this Airbnb that I was running. But also that gave me the security. So when I was on my maternity leave with no maternity pay from my job for a while, until the government coughed up a little bit, we had this like steady little income from this Airbnb that we had bought and done up. So that was kind of like the first phase before my business became, really financially successful. I actually had a bit of a portfolio of things going on, and I was with my little baby, and even when I was pregnant, I was cleaning the Airbnb myself. I was like walking across this park with like sheets piled up on his pram and like dropping the sheets off at this place that had no elevator. I remember like cleaning while he would like sleep on the bed. But yeah, so that was kind of how we made it work, like quite a bit of hustle. And then once the agency started to do well, I was like, you know what, I don't want to this is crazy. I've got way too much going on here. And so then we rented out the Airbnb just as a rental to like permanent tenants, and that just made life so much easier.
A lot of times you see people, especially online, talk about like Airbnb as a source of like long-term wealth generation. What's just your personal experience on it? Do you think it is, or do you think long-term rentals are a better way to go?
Yeah, tricky one to say. So in terms of the yield, like that flat cost us £250,000. It was like a studio. And we were able to rent it out on Airbnb for about £2,000 a month. So the yield was pretty good on that, but the work was a lot. There are companies that will do it for you, but then they just eat into your margin so much. And because we were kind of like a low rent Airbnb, like we were sort of like £80 a night, in a kind of like an inexpensive area of London, like to then pay like a company that would manage the cleaning, manage the laundry, all of that, it would just eat our margin so much. So it was kind of like we weren't quite making enough per night to justify like having a fully managed service. So that was kind of like the rock and a hard place we kind of found ourselves in. So in the end, I feel that it's not actually worth it. Funnily enough, the people who now rent that house off us are running it as an Airbnb. So we've allowed them to do that, but they just pay us monthly rent. And I just feel like for them, so they're paying the rent, and then, how much they'd have to make, like the difference between what they can charge and what they're paying in rent for the amount of work that they need to do just doesn't seem worth it to me. So I think Airbnb could work if maybe it's on your property and it's adjacent, and you live in a town where there's like cleaners available for, fairly inexpensive that can drive to your property. But like, there was no elevator, getting the sheets up and down, and like the sheets will just drive you mad.
The sheets alone were the reason you were like, no, we're going to rent this out. No more sheets.
Honestly, and because we were washing them all in our house. I mean, yeah, you get a bit of a sense of my mentality here. I'm definitely a hustler, but we did get a tumble dryer in the end, but at one point we were trying to dry them around the house in this, not very big house in London. There was lots of experiments along the way with how like easy and hard ways to make money. And I think in the early days, I was very much like, just the harder you work or the more things you do, the more money you'll make. But now I've kind of realized over time that actually there's just smarter, more efficient ways to make money that don't have to involve carrying piles of sheets up and down like cold, dark stairways in the middle of London.
I think that everyone needs to like try to work harder to make more money, to see that it works up to a certain point, and then it's just like the returns start to diminish and you're actually just tiring yourself out and not doing anything very well. I'd love to speak more about what you've experienced in terms of working smarter, not harder with your money. It's very clear that to begin with, it was like, do everything yourself to save the fees on someone else taking a cut, but what's shifted, or how did you shift?
Yeah, so it's still a work in progress for me, because I think with my ADHD and just the type of personality I have a tendency to say yes to like too many things and like over commit myself. And your post the other day resonated with me about like, building wealth so you can live a softer life. Like that really hit hard, because I think that's something I really need to focus on. But I will say that definitely like a lot of my success in my agency was my ability to like delegate and take hats off. And I see agency owners who struggle a lot more and aren't able to scale their business as quickly and as successfully as I was, because they just try and keep doing everything, and they think, well, I can do that, and I can do that, and I can do that, rather than pay someone money to do it. And yes, you can, but if you pay someone to do that thing, imagine what you can do with that time back, like how much better use you can put towards that time to like either doing stuff that you love and are really good at in your business, or taking some time out and some rest that's going to make you come back more creative, more energetic, and more able to kind of solve tough problems. I saw my business as like a steady step-by-step path of taking. So you start off wearing all the hats and you take off the hats you like the least, over and over until you're only wearing the hat that you like.
Oh, that is so simple but so powerful. I love that. Thank you. That's a really good piece of advice. I'd love to talk about your overall investment portfolio now. So if I could guess, it sounds like you kept both the house and the flat in London.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
How amazing. So you decided, I feel like a lot of people that we interview will say like they bought something when they were younger, but then for reasons they decided to sell it, or, they moved back to New Zealand or another country they decided to sell. Sounds like you thought, let's keep it. How did you decide that?
Yeah, so we decided to keep it for the time being. So one of the key things was that interest rates. So we managed to lock an interest rate on both properties that was like crazy good. So like, I think like 1 point something % on the house and under 2% on the flat.
Oh my God.
I know, right? So it means like the yield from the rent is actually like a lot of it is profit. So that was kind of like a key decider. I think so that was a 5-year deal that we locked in at the time. I think when that is up in 2026, luckily we've weathered the like really terrible storm of really high interest rates. But still, if it's 3% or 4% at that point, I am going to seriously consider like getting rid of one or both of them, just because I've kind of done the maths and listening to your podcast and some other podcasts around looking at, the steadiness of the stock market over time. I think the yield on balance is possibly going to be better than property. And the one thing, so we did really well with that first property. When we bought it when the market was just going up a lot, and it was a kind of a distressed property that we got for below market value. But once that kind of initial peak happened, the last 5 years in London properties have been flat as a pancake. So I'm kind of like, yes, we've been making money from the rent and the interest hasn't been very high. So on balance, we did okay, but I'd kind of like to be less leveraged in property. So I've started investing like literally just really recently in index funds. So when my agency was doing really, really well throughout the pandemic, it was funny. I remember this pivotal moment when I was like, oh, I'm making all this money. I should like buy fancy things. And I was like, what would people who have money? Oh yeah, they go and get their hair dyed professionally and like, so I went and got my hair dyed professionally and it looked exactly the same. And I was like, okay, so that was $500 that I just spent on nothing. And at the same time, I was reading a few like personal finance books and I was like, no, I don't need to buy fancy things. I can buy fancy things if I want, but what I really want is financial freedom. And I want to like have, to not have to feel like I'm, have a huge mortgage and that like I'm always stressed about my business doing well. And actually I want like, calmness and, that's what's important to me. So really, that made a difference to how I thought about kind of things going forward. And that led me to the decision. So we had bought some land in Wanaka and we were going to build this crazy big house and it was going to cost us millions and we were going to have a mortgage rate of like 7%. And it was going to be really crippling financially and it was going to put a huge amount of pressure on me and my business. And so we did a complete pivot and we sold the land and we bought a house that was far less expensive than what we were going to build. And it's a really nice family house, but it's not fancy. It's not like over the top. If anyone's been to Wanaka, it's like the Lake Tahoe of New Zealand. There's some very, very fancy houses and people here. And we just realized like who are we doing that for? Are we looking for some kind of status? No, we're just normal people. So we have a very sunny, like we focused on, we got a really big garden. And the house is about 20 years old. It's not like totally up to date, but we were able to buy it with not a very big mortgage. And then I made the decision a couple of years ago to sell that agency. And I made sure that I sold it for enough to be able to pay this house off completely. And so we now live mortgage free in our home here, which is now freeing me up to like any money I make in my business will now be invested away from property, because I feel like I've got way too much. The portfolio is way too much towards property. And I think that was because I had early success. You know, that first property, you get that bug. And then it was kind of doing well over the, with those low interest rates. But I think now the more I've read and the more I've understood, I want to have a bit more of a diverse portfolio. And so we might sell one or we might sell both of those properties in London, just depending on, we'll make some decisions when that time comes in a year or so, and decide what to do then. So that's kind of, how we're set up at the moment.
I wanted to ask, so you've got the 2 properties in London, your paid off property in New Zealand. Any other properties?
No, so those 3 properties, yeah.
Those 3 properties. And walk me through the sale of the agency. That's huge.
Yeah, so that was, again, like talking about like a softer life and like choosing your life over, success or, outwardly kind of, I guess, how it might seem to other people versus like what, how you actually feel. So I launched the agency. It had a huge amount of success in the UK throughout the pandemic. Like we were helping e-commerce businesses to set up their ads and grow. And it was a time, a heady time for businesses like that. So I really leaned into it. There was nothing much else to do. We were locked down for like 18 months. I had my little 3-year-old at the time, my little family, and then my business. And that was kind of my key focus and not much else happening. So I went all in and like really grew the agency and grew it to a team of 20.
Oh, wow.
We hit £1 million in annual revenue, which is apparently only 1% of female-owned businesses ever do that. So I'm pretty proud of that. And we had some amazing success. And then I was like, I want to move back to New Zealand, and I'm not going to let the fact that I have this business stop me, because that's the most important thing. Typical kind of Jessie way of thinking about things. So I kind of leapt before I looked. So off we went home to New Zealand, and I had appointed this kind of leadership team to run the agency for me. And I'd read books like The E-Myth and Clockwork, which all tell you can kind of automate your business and it will run itself. That turned out to be not quite true. And there's a 12-hour time difference between New Zealand and the UK. And I was still having to be really involved to keep it going and keep it running. And it wasn't that we were still really successful, but post-pandemic, it was a harder place to run an agency than during the pandemic. There was just more competition, and online businesses were like struggling a little bit more. So it needed me. It needed me a lot, and it needed me every night, and it needed me until like midnight online on Zoom. And I was so unhappy. Like, it's definitely the unhappiest I've ever been, kind of just in terms of my life was way out of balance. I couldn't sleep after the calls. So I was up until lying in bed awake until 1 or 2 in the morning, and then having to get up and be a mum, in the morning. So I was just really unhappy, and I couldn't see a way out. But luckily, I'm part of some amazing online networks of other agency owners and mentors and that kind of thing. And I spoke to a few people, and they were like, you should sell your agency. And I realized it was true. And so I I got some intros basically to people from that network, and met an amazing person called Tris, and he had an agency of similar size in Ireland, and he was keen to expand. And so we cut a deal. It took a few months of even more Zoom calls early morning and late at night because he was in Ireland. But we finally cut a deal, and the lawyers got involved, and then that took quite a while to get the lawyers to all agree on everything. But yeah, the sale went through, and in a couple of months' time, the earn-out will be complete as well. So yeah, it's been a really successful exit.
Can you give us a rough idea? I mean, obviously respecting his privacy and yours, can you give us a rough idea? Was it in the tens of millions, ones of millions?
I don't think I can say because of the non-disclosure agreement of the agency. I'm just trying to think if there's another way I could say it.
Well, how about this? If I can just guesstimate, if a company makes, £1 million, then you usually have a couple of multiples on that as part of the revenue, and then it's not usually paid out all at once. It's, over time. So people can do the maths and try and guess. But we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, but let's just say it definitely wasn't in the tens of millions. It wasn't that kind of exit. And, I think when people see exited founder, they just assume you've made your millions. And Agencies don't have like amazing multiples because they're so tied to the founder often, and they're not, the clients can disappear overnight. So selling an agency is never going to be like this kind of like crazy moment when you suddenly go from, you're a billionaire. But I made a decision that I couldn't run my agency anymore, and I could have. So one way to go would have been go hard for another 5 years and get it to like make it a $5 or $10 million agency and then sell it for like 30 million, whatever. But I made a decision that I just, for my family, for my personal life, I didn't want to do that. And if I had an exit that would mean that I would be mortgage free, that was enough for me. And so, you can put from what you just said and what I just said, you can put together like roughly the ballpark of where it was. And so it was a life-changing amount of money for like many people and for me as well. But it wasn't like this massive exit. But I'm also like, I still have 20 years in my career and lots of ideas, and, there's plenty more things I can do. And what it meant is it set us up as a family where I have like freedom to choose now.
I think that's a really important decision to make and distinction to make. And maybe people can't completely relate to the, if I keep working 5 years, I make a larger amount of money to that extent. But a lot of us can relate to, I know that if I stick it out, I'll be better off financially, but is that a choice I want to make? One of our previous money stories that came in from the Millionaire Diaries was a lady that actually lived in the UK, kind of similar, also had like very conservative parents around money, grew up in an accounting family. And she was at Uber, and they said she like got her payout. It was like £1 million or $1 million. And they said to her, if you stay another year, you get like the rest of your payout, like another million, or it was stay another 2 years. And she said, I just couldn't do it. She was like, I could not stay another year and sell my soul to not sell my soul, but be in a company that was different. When she started, it was like 500 people. By the time she was leaving, it was like, 10,000 people. And her parents were like, are you crazy? Like that is a life-changing amount of money, but you can't put a price on, hating your life if that's what it takes.
And like your physical well-being as well. Like for me, I felt like physically I was like going to end up having a heart attack because I was like, my body was having all the stress at like 11 o'clock at night and not being able to sleep. It just felt like so unhealthy. Like I was exercising and all that, kind of eating well and all of that stuff, but I just knew that I was putting like major stress on my body, and that's what kills you in the end. So
absolutely. A lot of times I'll have people say to me like, why don't you also do this? Or like, why don't you also do this? Why don't you add these extra components to your business or, start the start? I'm like, I like my life. Like, is there anything wrong with being happy with like, having freedom and flexibility? And sure, I could work myself to the bone and have a lot to show for it and have a really nice newspaper headline, like, but that's about it. And then I'd be like trying to make up for all the years of stress that I've put my body through.
Totally. Say what you will about the movement. Like I stumbled across some content around the FIRE movement, which is like financial independence, retire early. But something about that struck me, of this idea of like, you don't have to just like keep up with the Joneses and work because everyone works, right? Like you actually can make conscious choices that allow you to have freedom. And I think that around about that time I was reading that kind of stuff that I decided to sell my agency. And I think something sank in about this idea that if I could be financially free, albeit in a kind of a simple, not very like, over the top way, I could then live a life that, is way more conscious and like aligned with my values and do things that I really enjoy doing. So yeah, that's, it wasn't easy. There's always that kind of like, what if I'd kept it a bit longer, or what if I'd, whatever. But I have zero regrets.
Not to turn this into a therapy session, but I have to say, of every founder that I have met that has sold their company, no one has ever been happy with the sale. No one has ever said, I sold it at the right time and I slept peacefully at night the day after. Yeah. I listened to a guy, I don't think he'll mind me sharing this, it was like at a panel, and he had sold his company to Medium, like medium.com, where all the articles are. It was like an audio, kind of some kind of audio company. And the whole panel was him just like, he was like, you know what? Like, I just wish I didn't sell it. And we were like, no, it's okay. Like the audience were like, it's okay. Like he was like, oh, if I just waited like an extra 5 years, it would have been worth this much. But you'll always have those what ifs. And who knew if the world would have been the same in 5 years' time? Like a lot of assumptions are made into that.
And I think as well, like what I realized, and they say, like your second business is often like the one that's the really big one. And not that I'm not saying that I need to have like another business and another exit, but it's interesting to me because I thought I'd just like chill out straight after I sold my business. But actually, I've just got more ideas. I've got plenty more to give in my career. And what you realize having run a business, grown a business, and sold a business is that like it's doable. Like, and I could start another agency because I'm not like necessarily planning to do that. Or if I did, it would be very different. And it would be on the right time zone. But I think that once you kind of get the bug of like how you can make all the different ways that you can make money and like all the different possibilities that are out there, starting a new business the second time round is going to be much easier than the first time round.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And who knows, maybe you're like, hey, all these newsletters keep popping up and newsletter founders are like, hey, we want like to run ads, but we don't know how. Like we're writing people. We're not ads people. You're just like, hey, I've got an AI tool that will help you. Like, here you go.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I just feel very lucky because, running an agency and being in marketing, like I can sell stuff. Basically, I could sell anything. I could sell snow to Eskimos. So like that skill set will always be in demand no matter what Trump does to the world.
That's very true. Well, I have to say thank you so much for being so candid, Jessie. It's been such an amazing journey. And I think a lot of times the Girls That Invest community asks for stories of people that have, started with really normal lives that haven't had huge levels of privilege. They haven't been born into high amounts of wealth, and you've really taken what you've had and made it work and realized, hey, my unfair advantage is my skill set to be creative and to be analytical. Like, let's just run with it. You figured out that digital marketing was on the rise. Like, who would have thought to have studied e-commerce at university? Like, that is so ahead of its time, and you've picked up on all these trends and you've done so well. And I'm glad that it's been so successful for you. If you could leave our audience with one piece of advice and where they could find you if they wanted to connect and learn more, what would you say and where can we find you?
I guess one piece of advice I would give is, like, I'm hearing both sides of my, like, the two things I said, so I'll give two. One is, like, always spend less than you make. So always be putting something aside. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it has to be something, because that will give you freedom and possibilities in the future. But then on the other side of it, I would say, don't be afraid to take some calculated, well-considered risks. And that doesn't mean you're gambling. And LinkedIn is the place where I'm most active. I show up most days on LinkedIn. So you can find me, Jessie Healy. If you just search for me, you should be able to find me pretty easily.
Perfect. Jessie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's obviously very clear why you've done so well. You are so good at articulating your story. You've got such a optimistic and positive view on, money and business. And I just think this is such a cool story. I'm sure our audience is going to get a lot out of it. I've gotten a lot out of it. And I feel kind of at peace with the idea of, why do you need like the big fancy house? Why not the really nice house that's enough and have it paid off and just enjoy life? Like, that just has really stuck with me. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.